Okay, folks, can we make a start on the next session? This is the penultimate session of the afternoon, Economic Policy for Critical Minerals. We have 3 people in the room, and our final speaker will be online. Those of you who are particularly observant will notice we have 45 minutes for a session with 4 speakers, so you can do the arithmetic. So I'm going to ask all 3 of you here and Gabriel, who may be listening online, to really cut to the chase, be as punchy as you can with the key messages that you want to get across, because that will hopefully leave us a few minutes at the end for questions. So, Thiemo, can you start? Thank you.
Okay, so super fast, so I need to skip a lot of things. I mean, I wanted to leave some major comments, but I just leave that. That's more for dinner, maybe. Just in and around what we see is happening around the world. The UK and the EU Brexit negotiations, to me, are a unique window in helping us understanding what's unfolding around the world right now. I think it's a very important part. Talk about freedom of movement, informational boundaries, competition policy, single market integration, and the so-called technical solutions. It sounds a bit annoying, but it seems like the war in Ukraine has a lot to do with movement in these directions, and that's a bit scary because, of course, there was a constellation of interests in and around the UK with a lot of Russian involvement that puts this all in a very, very distinct perspective, for me at least. I want to highlight this work. This is work that was done by Jason Garrett, who is now at University of Ottawa in Canada, and he was working on essentially understanding Chinese industrial policy, so to say, through its pursuit of trade policy in and around the WTO accession. And basically what he showed in his paper is that the Chinese were able to replicate the benefits of being outside the WTO on a path to joining the WTO through the deployment of a system of export taxation post-joining the WTO. So they're essentially getting the benefits of not being inside the WTO while being inside the WTO. And that has been a major point of contention between China and the US and obviously Europe as well. Why critical minerals? Well, because of this. We all clear about why industrial policy. Well, because markets don't work when we have to engineer system transition. It's quite simple. It's an engineering problem. It actually is an engineering problem. I'm working on projects around broadly called engineering economics, because we actually need to understand how the network of value chains where we can actually interject and re-engineer the production process. And for that, we need to understand what the production process is. And here's where my Christmas sort of, my mom is very, very proud, because this is actually a gingerbread that my mom made. So I thought I'll sort of talk about this. Large language models are great because they actually allow us to infer or retrieve essentially information that is highly complex, such as production processes. And why does it work? Well, in the end of the way, it works because of the way that large language models are trained. And so here is a journey through the Wikipedia that essentially allows you to build a knowledge graph of how to make gingerbread as a good that is internationally traded, and we Germans are very proud of our gingerbread, and that's our contribution to the global varieties in essentially food, because it all boils down to food. Trade wars are food wars. So you can work out, how from gingerbread, a textual description of gingerbread, this is mapped and linked through the hypertext, through the links in that knowledge graph that is the Wikipedia, to the idea of baking. The idea of baking is linked to the idea of the capital good of an oven, and the idea of a capital good of an oven, well, there's many varieties of ovens and many processes through which you can bake and use. And so that's why large language models are great in retrieving knowledge that is structured across many different layers. What we do in this work on the AI-generated production network, which is something that unfortunately is not receiving any public support, research funding, is we essentially build that at scale. You can broadly think of that idea if you were to interact with ChatGPT is like, how do I make bread? Well, ChatGPT will retrieve that information. So this is what we call the forward prompt. We say, for a given output, processed good, what is the inputs that you need? We also do the backward prompt that says, suppose you have flour, what can you make with flour? And again, when we look at the joint intersection of the two, that should give us essentially it's just a path, you know, through the Wikipedia that, you know, you can go traverse forwards and backwards. That's all what we're doing. We're traversing lattices here. And then in the last step, we do a dyadic verification to prune potential false positives, journeys that we, you know, could or should not have taken. The end result is a knowledge graph that looks like this. So here for solar panels, we have the set of inputs, the set of outputs that you can generate. We have a knowledge graph for wind power generators, looks the same. And the depressing ones, these are, you know, tanks. You can see the evolution of economic complexity in that way of thinking would actually lead you to a state of war, which we don't want to enter in, but unfortunately this is a geopolitical reality right now that we're seeing. I want to highlight the US-China dilemma through another lens. I have like how many minutes?
Oh, another
5?
5, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm really fast. So we're building, and I literally was up until 2 last night because I said, oh shit, I have to present something new, so here's something new. Well, this is not quite new, but essentially when you think about criticality, and we had a really nice presentation earlier about our measures of criticality are really not so good, right? There's a risk perspective. I mean, there's many ways that you think about criticality. Here, what we're trying to do is capture the adjacency matrix that is essentially you know, an input-output system, right? Without any weights. We don't have weights here because, again, weights are meaningless because the price system can adjust. But from a technological perspective, weights are not meaningless, right? But from a market element perspective, weights are meaningless. We want to collapse that measure of importance of certain goods that is encapsulated by, you know, there being potentially many out-degree links from, let's say, rare earth minerals to lots and lots of other goods, right? So there's this value chain element. We also want to capture some geopolitical elements from this, which is the supply concentration of goods. So how concentrated are the suppliers or the demanders, right? So we can have demand-side concentration or supply-side concentration. And then, of course, there is relevance, right? How big is the global market for a certain good, right? You know, rare earth minerals happen to be not a very relevant large market. It's not billions, hundreds of billions. We're talking about in the order of magnitudes of 10 billions, but they're very critical. And so we're building essentially an index that incorporates these 3 pieces of information, applying, some of you might or might not be familiar with PageRank, which is the mechanism that used to be used by Google to measure the authority of knowledge. And actually that's something that we as academics do as well. Unfortunately, the systems have, just like PageRank, also citations as having many in-degrees or out-degree links have become hacked and basically information less. The amount of information that is in citations, academic citations, is not very important and not very relevant. But we're in a science publishing system, and you know that is not really taking that into account yet. But so what this algorithm essentially does, it sort of iterates the importance in sort of this matrix, and we are combining it with the trade concentration, which is just a node-specific measure, and the global trade share. And that allows us to essentially compute you know, an overarching, you know, this is a process that needs to converge. That's why we have a dampening factor that sort of, you know, it's like a geometric series. Kind of like you just iterate that network and you attach some weights on the edges. And these are calibrated, but we don't have a good target for what is a critical. So right now we're doing a grid search, but we don't have a good target. But well, we know that it's picking up signal. Let me show you some graphs. So this is when we look at what we call the integrated global production centrality of different countries or country blocks. And the 3 important ones are China, the US, and Europe from that perspective at this point. And what we see is a story that's very true and very close to most of us. We see that the US has become less integral in physical goods trade. That's why right now they're rushing and pushing out on the services domain, because that's what they got. unfortunately, the services domain comes with a type of informational governance that might induce societies to pivot towards localization. That's why China is countering this with the aggressive rollout of open source AI. And services are much more localizable than goods, in certain domains, because it's really just about building some elements of an infrastructure around it. On the other hand, we've seen China is trending up and Europe is hedged. China has bet on a lot of what's driven by the decline in the US lack of centrality in terms of global trade here is it has turned inwards because it has become self-sufficient in hydrocarbons. It's a story of hydrocarbon-based specialization. The Chinese story is one of manufacturing and specialization in the solutions to the problems of the world. The Americans have doubled down on the origins. And again, my personal narrative is because in the US, there's millions of people who receive a monthly paycheck from the oil and gas industry because mineral rights are not owned by the collective, so to say, society, but in very many instances, they're privately owned. So let me tell you, this is sort of this is the stuff that I did last night. So I really want to cover this. 1 minute, 2 minutes. 1 minute, okay. So what this is showing is essentially how the centrality changes once you remove China from global trade for all of these different goods. So on the top left, so we have, when you remove China from imports, you see that these goods become much more central. And why is this so? Well, and these are all mining goods, right? So we have bauxite, nickel, we've got rare earth composites, which are not the refined rare earths. It's because China is importing so much of it, has a huge market share of these rare minerals. And then on the other hand, on the bottom, we see essentially the value added that China is doing on these, because it's mostly metals, it's processed goods, it's the rare earth magnetic metals, the stuff that the electrodes, right, which is the refinement, the value added that's on the. And so when you then remove China from exporting these goods, its centrality, the centrality increases a lot, because basically China has a huge market share on the imports and has a huge market share on the value added exports. The American story looks like this, it's all in the middle. There's nothing. And that's why you have the American panic right now. And unfortunately, I mean, to me, it's checkmate. The US is checkmate. That's my interpretation of it. This is industrial policy, smart thought over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. And Europe right now is sort of sitting in between. It's neither critical in any dimension. And that's why it's the geopolitical hotspot. And the UK is the most interesting one of those, because the UK is the one that lives that contradiction being pulled between the US and China. You see that sort of around the embassy, you see that around so many domains. That explains to me the geopolitical contest that's taking place. And Europe is basically a battlefield. And it's quite literally has become a battlefield. There's many more things to be said, but I'll leave it here.
Thank you very much. Huge amount in there to think about. I'm not going to take questions at the moment, but if you do have questions, let's collect them for the group at the end. So I'm going to go straight to Francesco and then to Gregoire. So.
Thanks a lot. First, thanks to organizing for letting me present, and also apologize for the other three speakers and taking your time. And thank you for the passion. I would like to start by presenting, maybe introducing my co-author. Miao Dai is on the job market, so hopefully I do not do damage to his recruitment. If you come across his application, please do get in touch with me. He's also or with Hassan Ben Shakrun, the other co-author, who supervises PhD thesis. To introduce this subject, is related to trade and recycling critical raw materials. I use directly what the president of the European Commission said last month when presenting the intention to have a plan called Resource EU, This is some of the sentences. The goal is basically to secure alternative sources of critical raw materials in the short, medium, and long run for the European industry. And it starts with the circular economy, not for environmental reasons, but to exploit the critical raw materials already contained in products sold in Europe. Of course, we wrote this paper a few months ago, and we had an introduction making this point, and our article actually asks this question. It's a theory article. We want to understand if this makes sense. Can it make sense? So we look at an old literature called the Strategic Trade Theory literature from the 80s, and we extend it to include recycling of critical raw materials. So if you look at the structure of the classic, seminal papers in this strategic trade theory, is that you have two countries, they're static, there is an output market and then an input market. Input in their model is typically labor. It is not tradable, the input, while the output is traded and sold across the two countries. It's reciprocal markets. In the inputs markets, there is perfect competition, but on the output, there is a duopoly with two national firms. And what they do is to try to rationalize some protectionist policy before Trump arrived and make this very rational. So by doing what? Well, saying there is an issue already. You take one policy initiative, could be export subsidies. Typically, they did that. And then they wonder, well, the equilibrium is suboptimal because there is market power. So it would be useful to have some export subsidies or any production subsidies to get closer to the first best. If there is international cooperation, they would agree to subsidize these industries. However, if they just don't cooperate and they go for a non-cooperative Nash equilibrium, then they would choose to subsidize too much their industry because they want to get part of the profits of the market power profits. So there is a problem of coordination failure that is put forward. So against this background, what we do is that we add this idea by Ursula von der Leyen. Now it's not our idea, and so we, instead of having labor as a local input, we have these materials that enter. So trick, for the moment, we simplify very many things. In particular, these materials are not directly traded. Of course, the issue is trade in materials, but we want to focus on the role of recycling. So we add a local market for materials where there is either you extract virgin resources or you use secondary resources from recycling. And the difference is crucial. It's the key of the mechanism that we have. We look at is that we assume that the technology in recycling has a specific form characterized by positive production externalities. Why? Because the cost of recycling in Europe might decrease if the size of the waste that you can recycle increases. But the size of waste depends on the quantity of goods consumed in Europe, including imports. And that we want to really look at this channel of transmission, so we basically close everything else. So we are happy to keep away trade on materials directly so that we just focus on that. And therefore, we look at some specific subsidies. Instead of subsidizing exports, we look at subsidizing the local recycling industry. And we have the same two mechanisms as would say usual, as in the past, but we have a new one that is a new motive for public intervention that is to correct for this positive production externality. So you want to subsidize because it is efficient. So I would go through, my goal is to show you two things. Maybe I'll come back to the findings later. So we have a structure of our model that is composed with final goods markets, material markets. Then we look at the equilibrium, and then we introduce policy as the policy being subsidies recycle. So 2 minutes to explain you what is the specificity. The specificity is in the material inputs industry. Virgin have some kind of marginal cost of production that is specific to nothing particular. What is particular is the marginal cost of producing recycled materials, which is decreasing in the size of the local consumption. So I show you this way. So this is the quantity of recycled material on the horizontal axis, the price, this is the supply function, and the intercept here is a decreasing function on the size of local waste, that is local consumption. So when you put together the market of recycled materials with virgin materials, because they're perfect substitutes, so you get some kind of equilibrium with demand, and this is total supply of materials. What does it happen if you subsidize recycling? Well, you push down the supply schedule of recycled materials, therefore of all materials, therefore you increase the quantity produced locally. But if you increase the quantity produced, you also increase the quantity consumed, and therefore total waste. And therefore you have a second order effect that further reduces the cost of recycling of materials, which pushes for. So this is the externality that calls for subsidizing recycling. It makes sense. So we go to policies. To understand, you saw it from when we compared to the traditional theory that there are different motives to intervene. So in order to see the differences, we look at different cases where either governments cooperate or do not cooperate, and either they are myopic, so they do not take into account what you just saw, that there is maybe this externality in production, or they do take it. So as we move on from left upper corner to the bottom right corner, you introduce more motives to interview for policy. So 1 minute to conclude. So maybe all these motives act together. So there is, of course, with one instrument, you cannot correct the situation here because you both want to have more production, but you also want to have a mix of virgin and recycle. You want to correct for market power, so you want to subsidize, for sure is positive, but the policy coordination failure calls for too much subsidizing. However, given our story with the externalities, if you're conscious of the externalities, you want to subsidize more. So I didn't explain what this is. This is the level of subsidy on the vertical axis, and the horizontal is the strength of the externality. So when you're on the vertical axis here, it means that there is no externality, which is the basic situation. And so you see that the subsidy increases what you want to do, but much less at the non-cooperative equilibrium. So the non-cooperative is the black. Why? Because the non-cooperative government, it understands that part of the benefit of increased production due to their expenditure and subsidies will benefit in terms of higher world production, including export to the foreign country, therefore consumption abroad, therefore local waste abroad, foreign waste, and therefore the cost of the foreign company. They don't like this, if they're non-cooperative, so they subsidize less. So with this picture in the end, you have all the impacts that are together, and what you see is that it's not always true that you you subsidize too much. Of course, if the externality is very strong, then you need to subsidize more than adequate to equilibrium. And actually, you can be sometimes, if for some level of externality, better off with governments that are not aware about the externality than with governments that are aware of the externalities. You better have ignorant, somehow ignorant governments. Thank you for the attention. I think I kept the time, basically.
Thank you. That's, I think, a really nice paper. Hopefully people have an opportunity to comment on it afterwards. But Gregoire.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So it's a, how to say, it's a reply to a comment from Rabat regarding the taxation of critical minerals. I will go quite fast. So, okay. So the importance of critical minerals, everyone is aware of. Taxing the mining rank seems very easy, theoretically very simple, straightforward, but very challenging. And I will insist on the particularities for critical minerals. So taxing rent, the economic ranks is quite easy as long as we can identify the rent. But in practice, we have multiple tax instruments based on profit, turnover, and production factors, with the tariffs and so on. And we have multiple objectives of neutrality, stability, which is important. And the case of Mali this morning maybe is not is an issue regarding the inconsistency of tax policy in a country. And of course, we have some works with Rabat also regarding the actual inconsistency of tax policy and tax design in countries, in resource-rich countries, like as a result of interministerial competition. But it's beyond this topic. So we have also, we insist, we already discussed about the length and the period of the investment in mining. And so you have this risk of time inconsistency to attract investors, and there is a risk of hold-up. And so all the investors request for a stabilization clause. That's the reason why, even if you change your mining code tomorrow, it won't be applied until the next 10 or 15 years in every country in the world. In mining, you have basically two distinct stages, exploration and extraction. And for critical minerals, there is a third one, which is very important, and which is the processing and refining, and with the role of China. So exploration, I will go very fast. It's encourage risk investment. The main source of revenue in exploration is capital gains, and firms manage easily to avoid any taxation through indirect transfer, through the sales of the titles through offshore holdings companies. That's the reason why we can. We have this kind of recommendation in terms of ring-fencing principle to separate exploration from extraction issues. But this morning I realized that the ring-fencing principle is also will be also limited in the critical minerals. If critical minerals is a byproduct of other productions, and we have several other issues. Extractions, capturing the rent is the objective. Multiple tax bases, turnovers with the royalties, profit, and also production factors. And with profit, we have all the issues regarding profit shiftings, thin capitalization, and so on. Now you have to consider, and maybe it's also linked to the first presentation, that there is a trend to the servitization in all the economy, but especially in the mining. And servitization means that, and digital servitization is even worse. It means that instead of buying something, you are buying a service. For instance, Scania, which used to sell big tractors, big trucks, is not anymore selling a truck, is selling now a service of transport. And by this digital servitization, you can transfer the value, the created value, in a nice tax haven and offshore places. So which increase the risk of profit shifting. So the standard approach, of course, I have to mention the OECD solution with the base erosion profit shifting standards and so on. Very simple solution will be to implement withholding taxes on dividends, interest, and so on, but they are very constrained by double tax agreements that a lot of resource-rich countries have. And you have this nice study done by Beer and Leprick, which explains that these DTAs in Africa not only didn't manage to attract any FDI, any additional foreign direct investment, but moreover cost at least 5% of CIT. And if the country has a DTA, a double tax agreement with Mauritius, the loss is around 15% of CIT revenue. And maybe that may explain why Senegal's recently canceled its DTA with Mauritius. So the particularities of critical minerals and the taxation are related to this. You have this, mainly it's the processing and the refining step, which where the rent is not anymore in the pit, but more in the plant with this downstream creation, this transfer of the value downstream in the value chain. And so, moreover, you have a very highly concentrated processing capacity with the China domination. And that's the reason why, that's my main message. I am going back to the Chinese tax systems. Of course, we can consider export ban and so on, but the tax system in China is very interesting because it was also a tool to promote a kind of industrialization and to climb in the value chain. And so there is this fiscal reform in 1994 with the tax consolidation, especially in the mining sector, because a lot of local governments had at the beginning significant taxing power. So the central government managed to suppress this and to consolidate. China remains quite exposed to the tax planning issue, so the profit shifting, with a very important role of Hong Kong, and with all this phantom FDI and so on. But China and the great managed to build a great fiscal wall. It's not mine expression; it's from papers from Lee. So China, if I compare with other, especially developing resource-rich country, was not the rule takers of the Western laws. It managed to have a double tax agreement based more on the UN model and not following strictly the OECD approach, which defends the capital exporting rights more than the capital importing one. And that's my main message, that it is also a work joined with Rick and Rabat, that the Chinese VIT is very interesting because China didn't apply strictly the destination principle, which took maybe 50 years to become the norms in Europe. And that means that explains why China didn't refund all the VIT for the exporters. And it was a very important incentive to create some value in China. And for instance, in December 2024, China stopped to refund VIT to the exporters of copper and aluminium, but also don't fully refund the exporters of batteries, photovoltaic products. That means that if you consume a Chinese battery in France, you pay the VIT, a part of the VIT, of the Chinese VIT. So China not only managed to provide an incentives to create some added value in China through the VIT, but moreover, they raise revenue on the consumptions of foreigners, for French or for European. So, of course, some policy implications. The OECD 6 method, which has been imposed to the OECD by Argentina, is against the WTO rules. That means that when we are speaking about the price, price, commodity price. Don't forget that, for instance, a mining plant can sell to a subsidiary located in a tax haven. And so they can underestimate the turnovers, of course, the royalties, and of course, the profits. And a solution which has been pushed by the Argentina and adopted by the OECD was to relate the price to the worldwide benchmark price. But it seems to be very limited for some critical minerals. This solution has some limits. We can also imagine to strengthen, to reinforce the source principle and renegotiate DTA. Source principle is a principle which provide taxing power to the country which import capital. And finally, to reconsider the strict application of VAT destination principles as it has been done by China. So, in conclusion, and to a little, maybe it's a little pessimistic, but for critical minerals, the rent will be even harder for developing countries to tax and to extract. So maybe beyond the tax, other powerful tool will be to consider like contractualization and so on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gregoire. Again, please hold your questions until after our fourth speaker. We'll end up running a little bit over time, but I think online, I hope I have Gabriel Felbermayr from the Austrian Institute of Economic Research. So, Gabriel, are you online? Can you hear us? And if so, can we see you? If maybe we went, oh, here we come. I was worried that we'd gone even faster than we needed to. Yes, so we meant to say that Gabriel is in transit at present, so let's hope the technology works in our favor. Gabriel, can you take the floor if you can hear us? We can see you, and I think we can certainly see your slides. So please, can you take 10 minutes or so to cover your presentation? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We hear you in the room too.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry that I'm in a train in the middle of Germany. I hope this will work. The paper that I'd like to present is about the economics of diversification tariffs and the possible application of this in the sector of minerals. This is an idea that has been first proposed in a study to the German government, in which I participated. It took some interest there, then made it into a study for the European Commission, which I authored on the economics of diversification tariffs. This is, in a sense, the basis of what I have to present today. Now, the idea is to use a very simple, straightforward instrument that incentivizes diversification. And what I start with is a very, very simple model to illustrate the idea and also to illustrate the problem that we have. It's a simple model with a diversifiable homogeneous good, but the question is, in our context, critical minerals, do we have diversifiability, or is this at all possible? I think yes. So this needs to be illustrated. The assumption is that there are various supplier countries that offer that good or that input at given heterogeneous prices, PIs, that can be lower and higher. We have a buyer country, in this case, the EU, that's price sensitive only in the long run. There are switching costs when supplier countries are changed. When supply falls short in the short run, there is a problem. They can only be compensated domestically. That drives up prices very much. So there's a huge price shock when they
let's give them another 30 seconds to see if they can get back online. I'm tempted to suggest that maybe this is our opportunity to take any questions on the first three presentations, and then when and if Gabriel rejoins us, we can step back into his paper. So I'm just about to ask, does anybody have a question? He's going to come straight back at us. But any questions, we can always store them up if Gabriel comes back quickly. But any questions people want to raise, either on industrial policy, taxation, or the recycling? Yes, please. And if you can just make a note of the question so that if we need to take them up later.
Thank you for all the presentations. It was really, really interesting. I had a question on the first one, Thiemo, concerning the model of what you do with LLMs on the graphs. When do you know how to stop? Is it once you're at the stage of input from the biosphere? Because I would guess this is the furthest you can go. And then do you use HS codes directly, or do you use just the names of the products? And what model as well do you use?
You have to take the mic off.
This is the one that's working.
So there is no iteration, as in, you know, essentially there's just like when you browse through the Wikipedia, there's no more outgoing links basically. So in the end of the day, the graphs can get very complex. So when you do bespoke analysis for distinct value chains, you would typically, I mean, I know that the ASCII people are using this. They sort of prune, essentially there's extra pruning that you need to do. Because in the end of the day, there is no concept of the boundary of a firm in this. There's no concept of the boundary of a production process. It's essentially an end-to-end. So you end up getting, basically from the natural resource, which could be the sun, the energy of the sun to the bread. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, we've got one here.
A very quick one for Francesco especially, because it concerns recycling. So according to an OECD study, every investment that has been made into the primary extraction industry might translate as a kind of like loss for the recycling industry in terms of like setting it back. Do you think that could be incorporated into in the model?
Let me try to see if I understand what you mean. Is when you expand the primary production, it reduces the return on the capacities, installed capacities of recyclers?
Reduces the incentive to recycle, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you maybe saw at some point, I did it with an expansion of the secondary product, but the overall price would go down on materials. So in the graph that I saw was the other way around. Expansion of recycling would be detrimental for the primary producers. So clearly there are feedbacks in this sense. He's back, so
Thank you.
We'll keep up later.
Okay, thank you. Gabriel, we've been taking questions for the other presenters while you've been offline. So
Yes.
We're very happy to come back to you. And if you can pick up from where you left off, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, sorry for the interruption. Thanks for sticking with me. So there are various reasons why the importers might under-diversify. Some are related to market failure, other have to do with government failure. This has been discussed, for example, a recent paper by Gene Grossman and co-authors. The simplest way of thinking about that, I believe, is to assume that there is something like an economic security externality, where the fact that a whole country could be policy space.
Rabba, should we? Gabriel, I think we're just running into impossible technology problems here.
Okay. Yeah. So if it doesn't work, what can we do? I'm sorry.
Yeah. We really appreciate your. We really appreciate your efforts, and we'll put this down to German Railways system failure. This would never have happened in Switzerland.
Never.
I'm afraid
Never.
we really appreciate your contribution. We're tight on time anyway. And we really look forward to reading your paper, and please make sure it's circulated to the organisers so that we at least have a chance to engage with your work. Thank you again very much, and apologies for the failure of technology. You're welcome. So, how many more minutes can we take on this session? I know we're supposed to have started 5 minutes ago. Okay, we'll take a few more minutes on this session before going to the policy question. Do you feel you'd answered the question that was asked? You're happy with that? I've got a question up here in the middle of this side.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question for Gregoire Rota. You spoke about how it will be difficult to capture rent on critical minerals, and you start speaking about a powerful tool. And you spoke about contractualization, and I was wondering if you could expand on this topic and maybe give an example.
Yeah, it's like, for instance, in oil, there is a contract, the product contract sharing product contract. So tax try to work on this. Tax work well when the market work relatively well. Okay, so that means that the price is correct, and that you have a benchmark, a worldwide benchmark price, which is not the case for a lot of critical minerals. So, and criticality is an issue. We discussed this previously. So maybe an alternative solution is contractualization with strategic partnership between a country in the north, a rich country, and country in the south, resource rich, when you have yes, a kind of agreement which is going beyond the market, because the market is failed in this case, and that's the failure of this market which creates this the notion of criticality itself. Finally, the risk of shortages, and that even the price mechanism is not working well. So by going through partnership, maybe it's another solution. Honestly, I'm very, very pessimistic on any tax solution to extract a correct amount or a fair share of the mineral rent, and especially the critical mineral rents. I didn't insist, but a lot of patents are located in tax havens, and refining and so on use these patents, which means additional royalties, which increase the cost of extracting in the south or even refining in the south. So it's a nightmare.
Can I just quickly follow up on the point about the departure from the destination principle? So you described it in the context of China as having sort of two elements. One was as part of domestic industrial policy, creating protection or incentives for value addition. But the other was a revenue consequence. But that's sort of analogous to the terms of trade effect in a large country case. That revenue element from deviation from the destination principle does assume a large country market power situation that you can shift the tax burden. Is that correct, or have I misread the story?
Honestly, we can imagine a lot of things. Imagine, for instance, back in the 80s, the destination principle has been imposed as found as a temporary solution when we create the European market. Because at the beginning, it was the origin principle which was applied when a French guy buy a German car, Mercedes or BMW, collects the VAT. And then through a clearinghouse, they will remit this VAT to the French government. What happens actually in Canada. And then we didn't manage to reach an agreement among European countries. And we adopt this destination principle, which said that all exportation should be zero rated, and we should refund all the VAT supported on the input supported by the exporters. Now imagine that even a very small countries which extract some critical minerals refuse to refund the VAT. Then we can imagine that, for instance, a European country which imports this will accept to this VAT as a credit against the VAT collected at the border through a deductibility, so we keep the neutrality of VAT. Or it's an additional cost. Yeah, I agree. It may have an impact on the final price, yeah.
Final opportunity before we move to the final session of the day. Any last burning questions? If not, let me thank the panel here. I'm sorry I pushed you to move very quickly through this session, but I think we covered a lot of really useful ground. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.